Chinese territory in the Himalayas, a military skirmish was practically inevitable. The resulting conflict was short-lived, lasting only 1 month and 1 day between October and November of 1962. The People's Liberation Army of China had a vast numerical superiority over India's military forces, and India suffered significantly greater losses, with nearly double China's deaths, many wounded, and over 3,000 captured. This loss is partly chalked up to the fact that it's believed, according to some leaked CIA documents, that India underestimated both China's military capabilities and their willingness to escalate the conflict. While India requested military assistance from the U.S. in the form of 12 squadrons of fighter jets, their pleas were rejected, and India instead turned to Moscow for assistance. Ultimately, none of it did all that much good, as China claimed the Eastern Theater up to the line of actual control before declaring a unilateral ceasefire. India was left to lick its wounds, and tensions between the two countries have been high ever since, with conflict still breaking out well into the 70s. Both nations have ramped up militarization around the line of actual control as a show of strength, and this has left both with very little room to maneuver. In a sense, the Himalayan border is a military powder keg, and lately we've been seeing the sparks. While a past record of military supremacy definitely works in China's favor, the Sino-Indian War was also 58 years ago, and failure is an excellent teacher. India has been engaged in frequent conflicts since the Sino-Indian War, giving their combatants invaluable battlefield experience. India is widely believed to have won every conflict they engaged in post-Sino-Indian War, with the exception of the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, which ended in a ceasefire. China comparatively fought its last considerable conflict against Vietnamese forces in 1979. Once again, experience won out here, as the Vietnamese, who recently honed their skills in battle against the forces of the United States, are largely considered to have handed China's asses to them. This is why the value of actual experience in war can never be overstated. But let's take a step back and look at what these two militaries have to offer in terms of manpower, technology, training, and resources. First, soldiers, the bread and butter of any military. Much like the Sino-Indian War, China has numerical superiority, though in India's defense, seeing as China is ranked as having the highest number of active military personnel in the world at 2,035,000, China's military has numerical superiority over literally everyone. With over 500,000 reserve personnel who could be easily called into action in a wartime scenario, China is a force to be reckoned with. India, however, isn't all that far behind, with 1,237,117 active personnel and an impressive 960,000 reserve personnel, putting the difference between their totals in the mere hundred thousands. But here's the big twist. The numbers here only pertain to the Indian Army, which is the ground force branch of the Indian Armed Forces, whose total number of active personnel are 1,444,500, second only to the PLA's total active personnel. However, the overall numbers of reserve personnel for the Indian Armed Forces now dwarfs China's, at an astonishing 2.1 million. The Indian Navy boasts 67,252 active personnel and 55,000 reserves. The Indian Air Force has 139,576 active personnel and 140,000 reserves. In contrast to India's three-pronged system, the PLA consists of 5 branches: the Ground Force, Navy, Air Force, Rocket Force, and the Strategic Assault Force. The Ground Force is the Chinese infantry and land-based operations, with 975,000 active personnel. The PLA Navy has 240,000 active personnel. The Air Force even higher at 398,000 active personnel. The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, also known by the pretty funny acronym PLARF, is the branch of the military in charge of the land-based ballistic and nuclear armaments. They have only 100,000 active personnel. And finally, the Strategic Assault Force. This is the newest branch of the PLA, established officially in 2015, dealing with extremely modern forms of warfare, like space and cyber operations. This division is so new that we don't even have an exact number of active personnel. But due to the specialization of the job and the fact that the group is only 5 years old, it's safe to assume that it's likely the smallest branch of the PLA. However, we also have a far wider trend to consider here. The fact that China and India are two of the most populous nations on Earth, with populations of 1.393 billion and 1.353 billion respectively, as of 2018. In a situation of all-out war over their shared border, if both nations introduced conscription, the numerical differences between their armies would ultimately be nebulous. So, if neither army would have an extreme numerical edge in the case of another conflict, let's zoom in and take a look at the average military service member in each infantry, specifically their training, equipment, and weaponry. Thankfully for India, they've grown to invest in more intensive military training over the years, including joint operations training with the British, US, Japanese, French, and Australian militaries as their involvement in the UN deepened. The Indian military has also consistently invested in modernized primary assault rifle systems for their troops, currently working with a mix of American 6-hour 7.16 assault rifles and an Indo-Russian AK-47-203, a modernization of the famously reliable and hardy AK-47. As of 2018, Indian infantry troops are fitted with SNPP ballistic armor, even capable of withstanding blasts from the steel core rounds fired out of an AK-47. All these factors add up to one formidable individual soldier. China's infantry troops don't have quite the same thing going for them. Modern Chinese military training has been criticized for years for its lack of useful applications in real-life combat scenarios, meaning the average military skills of a Chinese infantryman may leave something to be desired compared to their Indian counterparts. They're formidable in the rifle department with the QBZ-95-1, a reliable bullpup rifle which performs best at long range. However, despite China being one of the world's most prolific exporters of body armor, it hasn't historically fitted its troops with that same standard of protection. The PLA is notorious for its light loadout, often leaving soldiers ill-prepared for taking fire, and giving the Indian infantry troops a huge comparative advantage. However, this may change in the not-too-distant future. According to a report from Global Times, China is investing heavily in updating and modernizing its training system, as well as planning on procuring 1.4 million units of high-quality body armor for the PLA. While this isn't currently a certainty, if these plans do go through, any advantages that the Indian Army may have had on an individual soldier level would essentially evaporate, leaving them dead even once again. But these days, war is far more complex than a large group of armed men running at each other and fighting down to the last one standing. In modern warfare, technology can give militaries the crucial edge they need to secure a victory over the enemy. Since 2008, China and India have ranked second and third, respectively, in global military spending, but the gap between them is still pretty immense. Last year, China spent an astonishing $261 billion on military development, compared to India's far smaller $71.1 billion. This disparity becomes a little more natural when you realize that China's economy is 5 times the size of India's. Let's take a look at how these numbers actually translate into vehicles for their armies, navies, and air forces. While China is generally packing more hardware than India, one exception is in the world of tanks, where India's over 4,200 stands over 1,000 units greater than China's 3,200 plus tanks. However, this doesn't paint the whole picture of China's ground capabilities. If we're looking at the number of armored ground vehicles overall, China's 33,000 dwarfs India's 8,600, giving them considerable ground superiority, bolstered by the fact that they have 10 times more rocket projectors than their Indian counterparts. China also holds dominance over the skies, with 3,210 aircraft compared to India's 2,123. It also has approximately double the fighter and interceptor jets and 507 workable airports compared to India's 346. Once again, sadly for India, this trend continues into the country's navies. In terms of total naval assets, China outnumbers India by 777 to 285. More specifically, it has 74 submarines to India's 16, 36 destroyers to India's 11, and if wars were decided on the it's unquestionable that China would take it. Of course, while nobody on Earth wants the conflict to escalate to this point for the sake of all human life, we'd be remiss to not return to the fact that China and India are both nuclear nations. If the war ever did become an exchange of nuclear force, who would come out on top? Well, for a number of reasons, China has a clear edge here. Not only did they develop their nuclear capabilities just over a decade earlier than India in 1964, New Delhi wouldn't have its first nuke until 1975, but their nuclear arsenal is also double the size of India's with a far quicker growth rate. China has a stockpile of 320 nuclear warheads, having grown by 40 in the past year. Compare this to India with only 150 nuclear warheads, which grew by a mere 10 in the past year. Both nations can deploy these warheads via the nuclear triad of missiles, submarines, and bombers, and thankfully for the human race, both have a no first strike policy. This means the warheads can only be used in retaliation to another nuclear attack, making it less likely that either country would want to strike first. Of course, if either did, all of us would ultimately lose from the resulting radioactive firefight. But on sheer numbers, China takes the clear win with regard to nuclear capabilities. One final factor worth considering is one that's rarely mentioned in a lot of abstract military planning: Allies. While it's easy to think of war purely in terms of enemies, your diplomatic and military friends can also be a make or break factor in determining the outcome of a conflict. While China could largely be working a solo war against India with the exception of perhaps Pakistan, a country with fraught relationships with India to say the least, India itself has been building diplomatic relationships with a number of extremely valuable allies. These include the United States, the country with the highest military spending in the world, who under President Trump have gone cold on relations with China while referring to India as a major defense partner. India has also developed strong diplomatic ties to Japan, France, and Australia through performing a number of joint military drills with all of them. Having these various world powers behind them gives India a serious combat edge over China, providing these allies come to India's side in their time of need. While the U.S. could be India's greatest ally in this speculative war, foreign policy under President Trump has been known to be capricious and unreliable to other allies, such as the Kurdish forces in Syria in 2019. So there's really no way of telling for sure. So back to our big question. Who would win in a modern conflict between India and China? Turns out, it's a lot more complex than you may have thought. While a layman might assume that China's apparent numerical and monetary advantages hand it an easy win, these advantages can be neutralized by India's stronger troops, who are better equipped, better trained, and more experienced, and its greater network of powerful allies. Then there's the strategic picture, as while the Indian Navy is smaller than the Chinese Navy, India itself is situated on the jugular of Chinese trade, so to speak. Chinese trade ships must pass through the Indian Ocean to reach.
If you go to the beach, don't get burned. Stay out of Rona's reach.
It's been a little while since you got some decent fresh air and exercise, so you decided, hey, why not put on my running shoes and go for a hike on the nearby forest trail? But on this very specific occasion, some light exercise is about to be extremely bad for your health, as you've just wandered into one of the hunting grounds of Siren Head, a 40-foot-tall monster from the demented mind of horror king Trevor Henderson. Before you can even figure out what's going on, you're hearing random words and numbers being screamed at you over a crackly old intercom. You look over your shoulder and see it approach, a huge, gangling figure emerging from the trees, arms outstretched to grab you. That's right, Siren Head is coming for you, and he means business. Are you going to end up like countless others, spirited away to an unknown but surely horrible fate? Will the details of your disappearance be playing out in Siren Head's Siren Head as he stalks his next victim? Not if we have anything to say about it. The chips may be down for you, but listen up. We're about to figure out how to go toe-to-toe with this mythical internet monster, and you versus Siren Head. How to defeat and survive him. Pay close attention. If ever this monster catches you with your pants down, remembering this video might just save your life. But first, you know the drill. It's a truth universally acknowledged in the art of combat that you can't defeat what you don't understand. What exactly is Siren Head? What makes this creature so dangerous? What are its combat capabilities? It doesn't have any apparent weaknesses? According to the wider Trevor Henderson mythos, Siren Head is the physical expression of a more cosmic being interacting with our universe. As mentioned before, he's 40 feet tall with incredibly long yet powerful limbs. His body appears to be withered or rotted flesh. As the name suggests, the creature's head is in fact a functioning siren with 2 siren horns. In each horn, the creature has working jaws and teeth, though he apparently doesn't need to eat in order to survive. So you won't be starving this thing to death anytime soon. While it's unknown whether Siren Head has any higher level intelligence or abstract reasoning, like human beings, and some of the other entities we fought on this show, like Pennywise the Dancing Clown and the Predator, the creature undeniably has a killer instinct. It knows how to isolate its prey in remote locations, camouflage itself as trees, telephone poles, and effortlessly swoop in for the kill. While hearing this might be sending shivers down your spine already, don't fret. This is actually a good thing. Allow us to explain. Like most real-life predators out in the wild, Siren Head follows certain tried-and-true behavioral patterns in order to capture its prey. This not only makes the creature predictable and gives you certain solid do's and don'ts if you want to avoid an encounter altogether, by analyzing the predatory patterns of Siren Head, you can gather valuable information about some of its strengths and weaknesses. For starters, let's take a look at the creature's natural habitat and hunting grounds. According to official lore, Siren Head avoids population centers, instead prowling around remote remote areas or on some occasions quiet rural areas. On occasion, Siren Head has appeared in more urban areas, such as behind isolated hotels, but the consistent factor is that Siren Head avoids engagement with large groups of people at all costs. The greatest number of recorded people Siren Head has been able to engage with at once has been a family of 4 who disappeared from their suburban home. But considering 2 of those 4 were children, the point still stands. Siren Head is an ambush predator, not the kind of combatant comfortable with taking on a large group of adults. It's even been known to spend long periods of time utterly motionless between attacks, blending in with its surroundings. We can learn 2 extremely valuable things from this. First, you can potentially avoid a Siren Head encounter altogether if you stick to densely populated areas. Second, if Siren Head is hesitant to engage with large groups, it does imply that the creature is vulnerable to being defeated or even killed if enough people with enough firepower back it into a proverbial corner. While it may be the physical expression of a more powerful cosmic being, that physical vessel can still presumably be destroyed if you're smart and or lucky enough. But let's get back to what intel we have on this mysterious being. We now know that Siren Head is an ambush predator that isolates its prey before moving in for the kill. What does Siren Head have in the way of actual combat abilities? While this may not seem possible for a being of uncertain higher intelligence, Siren Head is a master of psychological warfare. It has certain traits and abilities that can induce such a state of terror that victims may be tempted to throw in a towel before it even gets within grabbing range. The creature's immense height and its zombie-like rotten skin makes it extremely frightening at first glance, and its grotesque Siren Head is enough to make anyone freeze up. And that hesitation can be deadly, as Siren Head is known to move at startling speeds. If you let your guard down for even a few seconds, it'll probably be the death of you. But it's more than just the look of Siren Head that drives its victims into states of mortal panic. This beast has a terrifying mastery over sound. Not only does it speak in creepy, gargled snippets of music, numbers, and recorded dialogue out of its 2 sirens, it also plays the disappearance reports of its previous victims, heightening the sense of doom that surrounds the creature. But it's not just the psychological advantage either. Trevor Henderson has stated that Siren Head is capable of manipulating any device that can play audio, from car radios to cell phones. Not only is this terrifying, it can also effectively prevent you from calling for help in your hour of need. Without backup already on the way, Siren Head can stalk, isolate, and attack you when you're most vulnerable. This is one of the things that makes the creature so deadly. It never engages in a fair fight. It waits until you're most vulnerable and alone. Whether you're hiking in the forest or just walking home from work down a quiet suburban street, then it strikes with overwhelming force, ending things before they've even really begun. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but if Siren Head has caught you while you're alone, unarmed, and not expecting an attack, there's nothing you can do to save yourself. Though, if it's any consolation, you'll at least find out what happens to all the other people who disappear before it happens to you, too. In other words, there are only 2 ways to come out on top when it comes to Siren Head. Either stick to a densely populated urban area and avoid the conflict altogether, or arm yourself and take the fight to him. Seeing as humans actually move for Siren Head would probably surprise even the creature itself. That's right, the time for cowering and fear is over. We're going to teach you how to go Siren Head hunting. Firstly, you're gonna need to find some like-minded individuals with nerves of steel. As we've already discussed, Siren Head will avoid a group engagement whenever possible, so pulling together a competent hunting party of at least 10 people will be your first priority. How you do this is up to you. Whether it's putting up a flyer outside your local biker bar, or posting a Monster Hunter's Wanted ad on Craigslist, as long as you can find some tough, motivated individuals willing to follow you into a nightmare, you're good to go. Next, equipment and weaponry. Seeing as nobody has ever engaged in active combat with Siren Head, we can't know for certain what its physical vulnerabilities are. So it's better to be safe than sorry. But first, let's quickly discuss what you shouldn't bring. Rifles and machine guns are a no-no. Siren Head has the unfortunate combination of being rail thin and lightning fast, and as a result, you're unlikely to land a shot on this thing unless you have John Wick level marksmanship skills. And let's be honest here, folks, none of us do. And with a machine gun, you're also unlikely to hit the beast.
Where on earth are you going?
Thought I'd rob
These days, even a
It's August 1819. You're 16 years old, and you've just been hired as a deckhand on your first sea voyage. You're preparing for the adventure of your life, but little do you know that you and your crew will soon be stranded at sea, forced to eat each other to survive. The 87-foot-long, 240-ton whaling ship Essex is leaving today for a 2-year, 10,000-mile journey to hunt sperm whales. You grew up on the island of Nantucket, the hub of the thriving whale oil trade. So you've always known you would go into the whaling business like everyone else in your life. As the ship pulls away from port, you stand on the deck and wave goodbye to your family. You can't believe that it'll be 2 years until you see them again, but at least you'll be a sea-tested sailor when you return. Only 2 days after setting sail, you get your first taste of the sea's wrath when a fierce storm comes out of nowhere and nearly sinks the ship. After making some repairs, you continue on your journey down the eastern coast of South America, and 5 weeks later, the Essex arrives in Cape Horn off the southern tip of South America. To you, it feels like you've sailed to the bottom of the world. Unfortunately, the delay from the storm means you arrived late, and you find that the usually fertile hunting waters have been fished out. The captain decides to head toward the Galapagos Islands in the South Pacific in search of whales. After a long trip up the other side of South America, the crew anchors at Charles Island in the Galapagos to restock, where bad luck continues to plague their excursion. A reckless crew member's prank burns the entire island to the ground. You run through the flames and barely escape with your life. Thankfully, no one in the crew is hurt, but the same can't be said for the island's wildlife. You're now responsible for the extinction of the Floriana tortoise and the near extinction of the Floriana mockingbird. Finally, after more than a year at sea, your crew encounters a group of sperm whales. It looks like luck is finally in your favor, or so you think. The experienced crew jumps into action, immediately launching 3 of the ship's 20-foot whaling boats, crewed by 6 men each. Soon enough, 2 of the 3 whaling boats have successfully harpooned whales. No easy feat, since this involves rowing incredibly close to the whale so one man can harpoon it, then holding on for dear life while you try stabbing it to death with a lance. The third boat was not so lucky. It got too close to a whale and was damaged by the powerful beast. As the 2 successful boats are carried away by the panicking whales in what's called the Nantucket sleigh ride, the third crew returns to the ship, where you, as a lowly deckhand, had to stay during the hunt. As the first mate is angrily repairing his boat, you look out and spot the biggest sperm whale you've ever laid eyes on. It's a true monster, probably 85 feet long and weighing 80 tons. The whale is acting strange though. It's floating still in the sea, spraying water from its spout. It seems to be watching you. You shout out as it starts to swim directly toward the boat, traveling at a speed of around 3 knots. The first mate grabs a lance and takes careful aim, but